Then let's go. So, welcome everyone. Another episode of apparently the best recruiting podcast in the world. Somebody just tagged that on LinkedIn, and I was a little bit surprised. But at the same time, hey, why not? Let's raise the bar. Today is a really cool topic. I'm really passionate about. I think in my career as a talent acquisition leader, now that I have become a VP people, I kind of miss the work. Yeah, TA leader. These times are gone. But yeah, before in my career, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how do we get better people or raise the bar in terms of workforce or in terms of candidates. That has been a question that's been hunting me for years. I would not say decades, but like years, right? I'm not that old. And so here is the question. How do you actually make sure you increase the talent density in your organization? How can you ensure to hire the best talents, whatever best means, right? And then if you spend a lot of time doing this, you will end up into a very much of an interesting topic that we will talk today about is assessments, right? You will explore a little bit what are assessment criteria, how would you understand if this is more of a junior candidate or more of a senior candidate. And what I got exposed to in I would say the last 3 or 4 years and so far was the prediction or the predictors of future job performance, right? And this is very fascinating stuff. And that is also something we want to talk about today. And I think when you talk about assessments, you also talk about biases, right? We all talk about how biased AI is, but people tend to forget that the humans are more biased than maybe some AI. So I think we'll also talk about this in a nutshell. But now this is a very long intro. And as I always say, I will shut up now and introduce our guest, Shireen, who actually were so volunteering to talk about this topic. But before we start, Shireen, please, the stage is yours. Who are you? What do you do? Tell the people a little bit about it.
Okay, sure. First, thanks for having me. Very happy to be here. So I'm Shiran. I'm an organizational psychologist and the CEO and founder of a company called Informed Decisions Interview Intelligence. My expertise is with everything related to talent assessment. That's where I spent my career, at first as a consultant, helping organizations build customized selection processes and tools, but also actually diving into their own existing processes and conducting research to understand what works and what doesn't, what predicts success and what doesn't. The way that this is done, it's called a validity research. And the way that it's done is by looking at interview scores and notes and decisions, and not just from interviews, from the entire hiring stages, and comparing them with actual job performance, retention, KPIs to correlate and to do a more advanced analysis in order to understand what works and what not, and to continuously improve. So that's where I've gained my expertise. And in the past almost decade, I've been building teams, products, and companies to build technological tools that can help companies at scale. So in the past 5 years, I've built Informed Decisions, which is, like I said, an interview intelligence platform. We focus on interviews because, just like Matthias, you said, eventually we're sitting there, we're humans, we're all inherently biased, and that causes companies millions of dollars of bad hire per year. Just an alarming statistic for you. Hiring failure rates across the board from very junior to very senior positions stand at 50%. Think about all of the billions of dollars that companies are investing yearly when they can flip a coin, get the same results, right? So this is
Quite
why we're
literally.
here for. Exactly. So our mission at Informed Decision is to reduce the bias, to increase the quality of hire. And our approach is focusing on the interviewers as the most important hiring tool. Because what I've seen in many years that companies can have the most sophisticated tech and now AI, but interviewers, if they don't have the proper infrastructure, they will default to their own ways if they don't implement the technology. So that's why we look at interviewers and we aim to improve them with continuous and actionable feedback, both about the things that they're doing well and also about their biases and what should they do differently next time. And we monitor that improvement over time. So that's me and informed decisions in more than a nutshell, I think.
Amazing. Cool. Amazing indeed. Shiran, so let's just zoom out a little bit here. And I think it's something that kind of Matthias and I kind of touch upon a lot through these podcasts. It's why is hiring so difficult? Why? Why is it so difficult? I mean, if you think about the decades, millennia, if you will, where, employing an individual to work in your business has been a very commonplace thing. Why do we still find it so difficult? Why,
Yeah.
just kind of like 2 or 3 things in your work that you see kind of repetitively. What are we doing wrong?
Yeah. So first of all, I think the problem space that we're living in is extremely complicated. We're trying to predict human behavior. That's the most unpredictable and hard thing to predict. And it becomes more and more complex with time because our world is getting more complex. And the rate of changes, the pace of changes it's just too much, right? For everyone. So try to predict performance in that context. And then even if you hire the right person on paper, they have all the right skills, they're motivated to do the work, right? Everything, then they get to the actual job and they meet their team, they meet their hiring manager, the context of the organization, the structure of the organization, things that are constantly evolving and changing. So think about trying to predict something when everything is constantly moving. Inherently, it's a very difficult problem to solve. And then, now think about all of the other complex systems that we as human, we try to predict and interpret. We have methodologies to do that. Think about biology, think about physics, think about different domains. We have clear methodologies, we have a science, but hiring, how much time did you hear or even say yourself, hiring is an art, right? Like after all of these years and all of these other domains that you see in the business that are reliant on data and methodologies, hiring is still perceived as an art. And it's not an art, it's a science. There is over 120 years of research showing what works, what doesn't work. And still we're winging it. Still we're doing whatever we want, right? So these are just a couple of things that I think makes it so damn hard.
Absolutely. And I think you just kind of highlighted the key thing there. The biggest mistake that a majority of companies and then sort of leadership teams make is they're looking for skills matching. They're not really looking at kind of predictive performance or looking to kind of forecast how somebody will operate in a role. They just want the assurance that you have the skills to do the things that they think they need you to do in their business. And I think, certainly if we look at the arc of, kind of predictive analytics, I wouldn't say that that's consistently applied across a lot of companies in terms of that approach in hiring. So again, I think the one thing you've highlighted there is we just haven't evolved hiring significantly enough. Matthias, what are you thinking? You're nodding away there. It's just
you're laughing and nodding.
When you asked that really good question, like why is hiring so difficult? My first response was, well, because people are difficult, right? And I mean, let's be more impactful, I think, or mindful with my answer. What I have seen is what you said, Glenn, with they want to just match skills. I would be happy if they would already think about skills, because I do think that most of the hiring managers or business leaders think about pedigree recruiting. They say, I am working in this company, and there are other people who have worked in different companies. They're somewhat, successful. So that means this person is also successful. And making this kind of, logical decisions, or reflecting on a CV and basing everything on a CV. Similar mistake what people do, not just companies, but also this person has worked 10 years in this area, so they must be good. I mean, why would that person, after 10 years, you must be somehow solid. No, and I think these are criteria that are actually have no indication for prediction of future job performance, which is already where we need to start, right? Before we went on this podcast, I read also your Business Insider article again, Shiran. I think you have this posted somewhere around the halo effect, and there was something mentioning about behaviors, motivation, and then skills, right? And I asked myself a little bit the question, though, what is more important? Like, is there a chronological order? Is skills more important, or is it really behavior, or is it motivation? Because honestly speaking, my thought was, think about it. Is it more important that a candidate needs to be motivated to work for this company? Or is the motivation of solving the problems in the area of expertise maybe more important? What is it, right? Motivation is a big topic. And I maybe hand this over to you. Like, is there such a thing that we say focus on skills or motivations or behaviors, or even, not to open this up, but competences is actually much better than skills, right? So Shiran, I will hand this over to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, as humans, because the reality is so complex, like we said, we're trying to simplify it. We try to understand, okay, what should we focus on? The truth is that it's always a combination of things, and it's both skills and motivations and behaviors. Now, what's more important? It really depends. It really depends on the role, because there are studies or a meta-analysis that took like hundreds of years of research and compiled them together. And they're talking about things that you can see above and beyond different areas, okay, or different positions or jobs. So, for example, if speaking of assessment methods, so the more on the more predictive side, we can see structured interviews versus non-structured interviews. Okay, it doesn't matter which domain you look at, but in terms of actual or work samples, but in terms of actual skills or traits. So one of the things that is constantly emerging is intelligence, which I have more to say about, but like in a nutshell, intelligence up to a certain point. It's not like you need to hire a genius, okay? Like up to a certain point, it's predictive. But also the thing that is called conscientiousness, which is a very long word to describe work ethic, and being punctual and being on time and being dedicated. So that we see consistently. But for different roles, you can see different skills or motivations that are more predictive. So there isn't like a silver lining. The thing that we always do with our clients is to understand from them, or to get their input, or I call it hypothesis, because it's just an hypothesis until proven otherwise. What success looks like on the role. What are the skills, motivations, behaviors that actually predict success? We build a success profile. Okay, that profile usually contains 12, 13, 14, 14 skills, behaviors, okay, motivations, all of that mixed. Out of that 14, which, we narrow them down from sometimes 30, because we know, like, hiring managers, they want the perfect candidate, and there is a grocery list. Out of these, we then continuously monitor the performance and retention of the people that were actually hired. So we actually able to correlate skill scores with actual performance. We see that maybe 5, okay, out of these are actually correlated. Okay, so what I'm saying is it depends, and unless you have data, like first rely on best practices, rely on what works in your area. Probably there is research, you can start from that's a good starting point. But unless you do your own research and validation, you're flying blind. And I think all of us know that, like, there are companies that are doing the same hiring processes and performance evaluation processes for years, like for decades, and the world has changed so much just in the past 3 years, 5 years, but still we're running the same processes. How can that be?
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just on that point you made around structured interviews, Shiran, just simply a structured interview increases almost like the kind of validity of the outcome by 70%. I mean, it's
Yeah.
these sort of simple things. So what I'm going to do is play a bit of devil's advocate here. I'm going to take the position of a bit of a Luddite when it comes to assessments. And I've heard of Myers-Briggs. I know those kind of psychometric assessment tools are out there. But you know what? My gut feel and my experience and my intuition is the real kind of compass I need in an interview. And I'm sure you've come up against or sat in front of many individuals like that. What is your first kind of guiding narrative to them? I'm just like, yeah, the assessment tool looks really great. I've done them before, but you know what? When it really comes down to making that hiring decision, I can always rely on my intuition, skills, and experience.
Yeah. So first, like what you're describing is the number one bias that all of us have. Yeah, even me, that I work with companies to standardize and to reduce the bias. Eventually, all of us, like, we have that internal confidence, like we think that we're that unique snowflake that, like, we will look at a candidate and we will just know. So that's the overconfidence bias, and that causes a lot of the prices that we pay on bad hires. So sometimes this discussion is worth having with people that are open to data and facts, and actually proving themselves wrong. Some do not. Like, some just think that that's true for them, and they will continue doing that. And only when their environment starts to change and they will see that others that are implementing other methods are beating them and hiring better candidates than them, and like the environment and the context is already, like, they see that they're lagging behind, they will move from a different way, not from us proving them wrong. So the technique that I'm taking with different people around their biases or their overconfidence is different depending on the persona and how open they are to data and to a data-driven discussion and to actually changing their mind. Because if they don't, like, other things will motivate them, and just implementing the process in the organization and looking at the results that other people are achieving might make them change their mind. So really depends.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Matthias, I know you're keen to jump in. I just wanted to sort of say I've had that kind of conversation. I am an advocate for, the kind of psychometric assessment and the use of that tool within a kind of, complete kind of end-to-end process. But the one thing that I get quoted back to me a lot is, well, I have got a data point. Look at all the great people I've hired. So it's kind of almost it's an education process. They have a data point, and yes, that's completely valid. They may have hired a lot of people that have stayed in the business or retained in the business or have continued to move through the business, but that doesn't illustrate the kind of performance levels, the output, the kind of productivity, etc. So to your point, it depends on what data points they're referring to. It can be incredibly nuanced. It depends on how much data they're open to really kind of looking at. But yeah, I love that. And thank you.
100%.
Thank you for batting back my kind of Luddite position there. Matthias.
And I'm 100% with you. Like also, I hear a lot from managers, yeah, but I've heard some great people. And I think, also there within our memory, there is the self-serving bias. We probably remember the great examples because, that's what pats us on the back and it doesn't threaten our ego. But if the organization would methodologically monitor performance, retention, other KPIs, I promise you that the reality is not that beautiful as we paint it in our memory.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you. I mean, because in an environment where there's less structure and there's no measurement around performance or also how the business is going forward and drive forward, then it's hard to prove, and then it's very much the gut feeling that drives performance management. But the more organizations evolve, I think the more they get more serious around these topics. Yeah. And most of the time I would always argue, why do you even talk to me if everything is fine? Like, look, you have invited me to maybe share with you a little bit of how we in a more data-driven way make hiring better and more predictable. And that's why we have this conversation. So there seems to be a pain. Otherwise, you would not do this, right? And I do think that also if you do hiring coaching or hiring manager training, right, that people are like, there's a problem. At least this is my career impression. I only get involved or introduced to companies if there is such a high pain in hiring and they don't know how to solve it. And then they come in and say, Matthias, here, we need to change something. And then this is where I come in, and then they would love to stick to the processes and everything they had before, but I can make that very clear to them that, here are the reasons why this is not working. And then it becomes more of a change momentum, right? But I'm totally with you. I think, every leader in the world out there has made bad hires, right? If they're really self-aware, which is another topic we talk about, because there was maybe this is an interesting sideway into intelligence. Shiran, you mentioned this. Intelligence is really important. Now, there are lots of kinds of different intelligence out there. Yeah, cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence. Like, guide us a little bit through why intelligence could be a predictor of future job performance, or what do we need to do? How do we separate this? Because last thing is what I have experienced in my career with people teams. They are not so fond of intelligence tests. Therefore, whatever reason, they'd be like, yeah, but intelligence, maybe not. So tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah. So first, intelligence in psychological research, it's called general mental ability. The reason I'm telling you this is I think that term explains a little bit more. What do we mean when we say intelligence? And especially in the context of the workplace. Eventually, we're looking for people that will learn fast, that they will be able to process new information quickly and derive from it, even without being told like very specifically what they need to do. They will be able to derive. So we're talking about a processing capability, learning capability, and then implementing what you've learned. So that's and that makes sense, right? It makes sense that if you have that capability, you will do better on the job. But what I'm seeing with the organizations that we're working with, and also generally, that this is being glorified. Meaning we're looking for the most brilliant people. And like if you look at, how Google tells their story or other tech, like we have the most brilliant people working for us and like they're the smartest, etc. Now, for most jobs, like most of us are not rocket scientists, okay? Most of us, we need that processing ability, right? But up to a certain point. And then it backfires on you as an organization. Because if you're looking to hire just the top of the cream, the top of the top, then first you're narrowing your pipeline very significantly, right? And then not necessarily, like we also know that very high intelligence, cognitive intelligence or general mental ability, sometimes it's being traded off with other, like more interpersonal capabilities, right? So there is also a trade-off to that. So yes, intelligence is important, but it's important in most positions up to a certain point. Like it's not a fully linear correlation there. And the reason I think, companies dislike cognitive tests, first, they're time consuming. And we're talking about, an era where like instant gratification, especially, Gen Z, etc., like they don't have patience. So that's one. I think also for more senior positions, uh, we will never say like for a CEO or a VP or like we don't do cognitive tests because there is also something about candidate experience. People that have went up in the rank to where they are today have somehow already proven, and it's not always true, but have somehow already proven that they have some kind of a decision-making capability, etc. So now, sitting and having them, I don't know, solve math problems or puzzles, there is also the candidate experience in that component. And also, I don't think that's the only way you measure intelligence. You measure intelligence and critical thinking and creative thinking in an interview. You don't have to put them into like a 1 hour assessment solving puzzles. So that's what I have to say about that type of intelligence. Now, we all know the role of artificial intelligence in our lives, right? Currently and also in the future. And I think in many senses that it will not like completely take away from the human intelligence, because of course we need that, but our capacity to process is now sometimes outsourced to AI. And that's where we see what the common term is soft skills, but also power skills or human skills, which I like better. We see them coming into play much more. And then you've talked about emotional intelligence. And then I think, when a lot of the things that you'll be doing is automated, but you still have human clients, right? You still have the human interface. This type of capabilities will become much, much more important. And I'm sure that's what we'll also see in the data, like with the years and kind of the skills research. I'm sure, and also when you look at the World Economic Forum and all of those future of work reports, we're already seeing that the soft skills, the power skills, their importance are on the rise.
That's really interesting, Shiran. I think it's there's a couple of pieces in there. One, I want to draw us back to bias, because look, in humans, right, bias is inevitable, right? I mean, it is inevitable. I think it's really around how we kind of recognize it and respond to it. I think coming back to that kind of Luddite persona, and linked to the topic that you just mentioned there in terms of kind of AI as a tool, how are you, within that kind of assessment tooling community, reducing bias in the tools, just more generally? How is that done? Because certainly within certain AI tools that are available to us now, we don't know, or there's kind of limited information around how bias is being addressed. I know that, obviously kind of OpenAI are kind of blogging about the build, and you've got, other kind of AI tools doing the same, but we still don't fully understand how bias is being either removed or reduced. So if we come to the sort of your tool, and within that community, how is bias being reduced?
Yeah. Okay. So let me start with just saying that, yeah, there is a reason why there is an unclarity around that, and that's because vendors, I think generally AI vendors, but specifically in the HR tech or work tech, they're not being clear enough about that. They say like we're unbiasing our algorithms, but you don't really know. It is really a black box. And I think that's a huge problem. And like, I know that there is a lot of now litigation forming around it. And I think it's really a blessed and necessary initiative. Also, I think that the situation is generally bad when we're talking about HR tech solutions. Why? Because what most HR tech vendors do is they just train on your past data, and your past data is biased because you had a recruiter or a hiring manager that was making decisions based on experience, like Matthias said, or someone that is similar to them, or their intuition or their gut. And then we will see the same biases perpetuating, like garbage in, garbage out, right? That's the input, biased input in, biased input out. And I think, that's also the reason for the vagueness around that, because that's mainly what's happening. Now, that is also the reason, coming to us at Informed Decisions, that's the reason why the mission that we've set for ourselves, first and foremost, is not to develop an unbiased AI, is to reduce the bias in humans, because the human input that we're feeding our AI, it will become less and less biased with time. And then we can train on it to better predict and to make decisions. But what we're first and foremost trying to optimize is for reducing human bias. And the way that we do that is that within our interview platform, so of course we're structuring the entire interview process, and interviewers are using it to interview and to score and to document, and we have an AI bot going on the interview, transcribing everything. But basically, from the scoring patterns and from the different patterns that we're seeing for the different interviewers, we're able to highlight and actually track patterns that we can call them a bias, or vice versa. It can actually be a very positive behavior. And we're actually able to show that data, if it comes up consistently in multiple interviews, to the interviewer and say, hey, when you're interviewing, and this is real, by the way, when you're interviewing candidates in the afternoon, you consistently provide lower scores than for the candidates that you interview in the morning. They probably have no idea that they're doing that. And it's not just about showing them the data, it's also telling them, okay, so what can you do next time? So of course, we won't tell anyone, don't interview in the afternoon. It's not applicable, right? But we can say, hey, if you're interviewing in the afternoon, next time, take 5 more minutes to prepare. Drink coffee. Have a small break. Anything that will just kind of make you more alert, right? And that small change, it works magic. Okay, so to your question, for us, it's first about reducing the bias in humans, and then taking that input and training on it. And more than that, eventually, like, we're developing questions, different interview questions to help assess different skills. So of course, continuously we need to monitor ourselves, like, does the question that we are developing, do they generate different scores for men and women, for different genders, for different ethnicities, etc. So there are multiple ways to do it, but the basic thing here is that your decision-making mechanism for AI, it can be a black box for your clients, and to talent acquisition leaders and professionals that are in due diligence with vendors, I'll say that you have to ask those questions. It's your responsibility to understand how does the algorithm make a decision or a recommendation or provides a score. What are the different components that come into play? What are the weights? It's a bit technical, right? It can be boring because eventually you just want them to solve your problem, but it can eventually, at the edge of this, there are people and that are either being rejected or accepted. So really, it's really important decisions.
Please. This is super interesting. I really love that point of intelligence and GMA, and then highlighting emotional intelligence. There's also something called cultural intelligence, and it's super important that let's assume people get this now, that they say, look, intelligence is important, but there are other kinds of intelligence that are more important now. How to do that? How do you then screen for emotional intelligence or maybe cultural intelligence? Is it better to do it via competencies or skills? Shiran, tell us a little bit what your experience is. Does it really matter, or is it one or the other?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so first I'll say, I'll start from the end. Competencies and skills, I see them used a lot interchangeably. And I think also in hiring, even the companies that go in the direction of skills-based hiring, competency-based hiring, they mix the both up, okay? And I'll take the example that you mentioned about emotional intelligence. Eventually, is emotional intelligence a competency or a skill? We can answer that question in a second. But what I'm trying to say, I think like the differentiation matters less. What matters most is that you as a hiring team are aligned on what it means. Because there is an experiment I run every time with a new client. So if I speak to different stakeholders, for example, a hiring manager and a team member or a recruiter, I'll ask them, for example, also, okay, so what's emotional intelligence? How does it look like in the role? And you'll hear different definitions coming from three different people. So I think the first and most important thing, even like you can call it a competency, a skill, is what is that? How does it, and don't give me a dictionary definition. It doesn't matter. How does emotional intelligence look like in the context of this specific role? Like day-to-day behaviors that reflect that. Okay, so that's the most important thing. But if we're speaking about like, going back to the discussion around like, should it be skills or competencies? So let's first of all differentiate between the two. A skill is a basic measurement unit of a specific task, like your ability to complete or to perform a specific task. So, think about it as like atoms in physics or genes in biology, like the very basic or core measurement unit of job performance, versus a competency, which is how you effectively apply a combination of skills and knowledge and behaviors to achieve some kind of an outcome. And if I need to give like an example, then we can have multiple skills like active listening and effective communication and time management and emotional intelligence. And when we take all of these together in a specific context, like building pieces of a puzzle, then it can take us to a competency of project management. Okay, but if we then mix it in a different way, we can get to another competency. So I think it's really important to differentiate. The way that we work is we work with skills-based hiring because, like I said, I believe that just as atoms are the building blocks of physics and genes are the foundations of biology, skills are the fundamental units of understanding job performance. And what we're trying to do is to break the job components to their basic skill, so we can then evaluate them in different job contexts and in the context of different competencies.
That's fascinating. I don't know, Matthias has got a whole host of skills-based hiring knowledge. Can I ask you both actually, in terms of skills-based hiring, I'm seeing two different approaches. I'm still seeing people validating skills. So almost just a small shuffle on from skills matching. So there's skills validation. I'm not seeing as much skills application. So scenario-based, context-based, outcome-based. Are you seeing something similar, or is this just my unique my own echo chamber, because skills-based hiring seemed to become the trend topic last year. Everybody was talking about skills-based hiring, but what I was seeing was still skills validation. So they were going down to skill level in terms of actually what skills are needed for this particular role, but they were still just validating them. Are these skills present? As
How?
opposed to,
Like, what do you
can this
mean
person?
when you
Yeah,
say?
exactly. As opposed to, can this person apply these skills in
Mhm,
this particular scenario or this particular context, which is valuable to us and our company.
mhm.
So I don't know. Is your experience similar or different?
Yeah, so just I want to make sure that I understand what you mean when you say skills validation. You mean
Mhm.
that, for example, they will look at the candidate's CV to see if they have that skill, like based on their previous experience, or something else?
Yeah, so it's a step on from that matching in so much as, so put it in an interview context. They'll ask a question around that particular skill. The question will elicit a response that basically allows the interview to talk about their knowledge of that particular skill. It won't take that step onto how have they applied that skill in a context that's delivered an
Yeah,
outcome that's
like tell me
valuable
about a
for that
time when
particular.
you need to manage a complex relationship
Exactly.
at work, or to
So
motivate someone. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, okay,
and
I get it.
yeah, and I was just wondering, in your experience, skills based hiring, are you still seeing, ideally hiring managers really sitting in that skills validation? Because actually, it takes a lot of work to get to a point where you have a series of almost like measurable outcomes and scenarios that will help you make that hiring decision. If I'm honest, it's just easier to still do skills validation and
Yeah,
almost skills checklisting.
yeah. Like maybe because skill-based hiring has become my favorite pet project
Yeah.
for whatever reason. No, I actually think it works if you apply it correctly. And here we are with your question, right? I think in the hiring process that you have in the beginning, you validate for sure, right? You can also do application of skills in the first beginning, but then it has to be through a test, like an assessment. So let's say I know that you're a senior talent partner, you want to get hired, and I ask you a little question around how do you apply in certain different scenarios your knowledge, what would be the right answer, multiple choice. However, that can be done already in the very beginning. But when let's assume most of the people don't do tests top funnel, right? So then I think from my experience, what they do is exactly what you said, Glenn. They will have interviews and do checklists and then say, okay, that person has this proficiency and this and on these skills after my interview because of the questions and the answers I got. But, and this is something where I would say I will do this a bit different. What I then do as part of the interview process is I call this a functional assessment. What does that mean is in the first two rounds, I validate the skills people have. And in the third round, I want to see the skills, if they're still part of that third round, to be applied on certain scenarios. Because it doesn't matter for me if you have wonderful skills, but you don't know how to apply them, right? So I give you scenarios, work sample tests, a little bit like what Shiran talked about in the beginning of predicting future job performance. It's one of the areas that creates a higher validation of your hires. And then you would see, it's always very funny, in the beginning of the process, communication is the reason number one why people are rejected, right? They cannot really talk about it. But what communication is also um, a little bit of a bias is a great extrovert will talk their way out of difficult situations and will cover their weakness. Well, but if you have then the scenario based application or applying your skills, they cannot hide away anymore. And I have seen this so many times that they talk a good game, and then when they see data, when they do analysis, when they need to actually apply it, game over. Yeah. So my take would be here. I'm totally with you. The problem with skill-based hiring with a lot of organization is first the definition, second they just do validation. but they are not applying this on real cases in real scenarios, and this is where this goes wrong the whole time.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you mentioned that, Matthias, and I guess my soft pushback on that is the third stage interview too late to be assessing that? Wouldn't you want to front load some of that? So with the tooling, and Shiran, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, in so much as actually, if think about an interview in the cognitive load in an interview, it's almost like having some form of kind of tooling or testing or assessment, and just a general Q&A as a mixture for that particular interview. It could actually be more, one, as an experience, be a little bit more interesting. Two, I think you get different types of kind of data and reference points at a very early stage, which I think is more valuable. And actually it helps you iterate your following interview stages, because if there is, to your point, Shiran, bias in the interviewer at that early stage, you can start to kind of obviously recognize and respond to it. So I guess my question for you, firstly, Shiran, is how early in the interview process would you start to introduce tools such as yours? Is this, because let's be fair, I've been in a situation where these kind of tools have been used as a final stage, almost like, can we use it at a kind of final stage, etc. So from a tooling point of view, when would you recommend kind of introducing it? When does it have the most impact?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll answer that in a second. I just want to refer back to something that Matthias said that I have to comment on, which is the effective communication part, because this is actually something that we're seeing so clearly in our data. So one thing that we're doing is that we're correlating our interviewers, like on the platform, they score skills, but then at the end of each interview, they also give their overall impression. Okay, and then we're correlating each skill score with the overall impression. And what we're seeing, that the skill that is most highly correlated with an interviewer overall impression is effective communication, which is basically the candidate's ability to interview well and to tell a compelling story. Now think about the bias that this creates. Like Matthias said, introverts, extroverts, and think about an unstructured interview. Like that can hijack the entire conversation. Just the storytelling capabilities of a candidate, they can be amazing, but what about the rest? And even like, is storytelling even relevant? And now going back to your question, Glenn, I believe that this should be embedded very early on, and I think it can also save the interviewer resources, because like, let's be honest, like screening based on CVs was never very predictive or effective. Now with AI, where all of this is optimized for ATS and basically looks the same, it's becoming even worse. So implementing a skills-based assessment early on to assess not just skills but also motivations for the role, and to allow you to pre-screen candidates based on that, I think first of all it can take the load off. Should we only look at that? Shouldn't we let them talk to a person, to a candidate? So I think it really depends on the resources that a company has. Like, I'm all for the first touch point to be human, because that engages the candidate and also gives them more motivation to then complete, I don't know, a 10, 15, 20 minutes assessment. It's investment of their time. So let them talk to a person. But also in the initial evaluation, don't just look, because usually how does a recruiter pre-screen look like? It's just like validation, and not even skills validation. Do you have that degree? Did you work for that company for 3 years? Okay, it's just experience, credentials, and it's basically useless. How about we take that 5, 10, 5th, sorry for being so blunt. But how about if we take that 15 minutes and evaluate skills, stuff that you can evaluate like early on, like effective communication, but also a little bit of growth mindset and a little bit of motivation. You can definitely look into those. So yeah, my answer, incorporated as early as possible. And one more thing that I'll say, that everyone is using behavioral questions, which is kind of the best practice, and it was the best practice for many years. But I'm also here, I'm saying behavioral questions, basically the underlying assumption is that previous behaviors will predict future behaviors. And that can only be true to an extent in an ever-changing world, where what you did in your last role might be not at all similar to what you'll do in your next role. So I'm not saying don't use behavioral questions, use them, but don't only use them, because also when your candidate will ask ChatGPT, what will they ask me about project management, it will tell them, tell me about a time when you've managed the conflict, and they will come with a scripted answer. So also in that respect, it's gradually wearing out like the validity of the behavioral questions. So use it, but not just that.
Yeah, I love that, and I love I love your kind of advocacy for almost human-centered first contact, as it were. Because it motivates an individual, doesn't it? It motivates an individual to want to invest their time in the next stages. Certainly, if you're asking free time, effort, and an investment of free time, just that initial call. And to be fair, that initial call can be a pre-screen. It doesn't necessarily need to be as kind of dull as most pre-screening calls are. It could be 2 or 3 questions, just open up a conversation. So something like, and if we think about kind of the SaaS-based world, it's like, what do you think are the 1 or 2 biggest challenges in our industry at the moment? Just open it up with something that's quite conversational, that allows that individual to kind of show you a bit of their creative thinking, their understanding of the marketplace they're in, just their general thoughts and opinions. And that is enough to kind of get that initial engagement, and then move on to, okay, well, the next stage is almost this, almost collection of assessment pieces that we start to build a bit more of a picture of you. And I think that's really what a great interviewing process looks like. It's taking somebody through a number of conversations, creating an experience for them to allow you to create a really holistic picture of this individual, and that informs the hiring decision.
100%.
Yeah, that was more a statement than a question. But Matthias, to bring us home, what's the closing question for Shiran?
Closing question. I actually want to challenge your opinion a bit on what you just said, but hey, look, I will not do this because I'm a nice citizen and co-host. I think for
I like being challenged.
Yeah. Well, that's to be continued. Yeah, you need to follow this podcast to see more of this. I would love to maybe spend the last couple of minutes very much into this AI topic a bit more, because let's assume, or we all know, that organizations are not really good in assessing candidates, and have broken processes or no structures and so on. Now we know that candidates have AI, and they kind of optimize cover letters or the resumes, right? We know that naive hiring managers or talent acquisition professionals use AI with, questions they should ask or job descriptions they designed. So is AI really helping hiring processes to become great, or does it help more candidates, or does it help more companies? Like, what is your take here? And especially, like, there is this one topic that I see, or the 2 tendencies, right? That some organizations go down this path of, we need to avoid that people use AI. And then other organizations say, you know what? I want them to use AI. I want to see what they can do. Like, this is something that I want to spend the last couple of minutes with.
That's a zinger of a question.
Well,
you asked me. I'm sorry.
No, I'm a difficult guest in that sense, that I won't just give you like clear cut yes or no, like good or bad. There isn't. Like, it's such a complex topic. Regarding candidates, I think it is a blessing for candidates, and I think especially for underprivileged candidates that they didn't have the resources to pay someone to review and format their CV, or to improve their LinkedIn page, or to do a pre-interview training with them. In that sense, it levels the playing field, and it's a good thing. But then if it makes them detach from their authentic self, it makes them even lie, or then of course it's not a good thing. On the employer side, if everyone is looking and sounding the same, of course we need to up our assessment game. In terms of how businesses are using AI, so again, if you're using it blindly to make decisions and you're saying, oh, I trust it more than my judgment because it's less biased. So we've already discussed that, and we know that there are a lot of holes in this theory. So of course, that companies that refrain completely from using AI will stay behind. They will inevitably stay behind. So I don't think avoiding it is the answer. It's how do I use it thoughtfully? How do I use it in a way that amplifies my judgment and does not replace my judgment? And with that, like, there are so many topics that we can discuss around, fairness and prediction and ethical decision making. So of course we don't have time to go into all of that, but like, just as a basic principle, I'll say use AI, but think how you use it thoughtfully. And you can't really prevent, like, don't be under the assumption that you can prevent candidates from using AI. That also will not happen. Like, you're kidding yourself, right? So just think, how do you allow them to use it in a way that will reflect how they will use it on the job instead of preventing it, because that's unrealistic.
Yeah.
So I'll end on that note.
Well navigated, Shiran. Well navigated. I mean, because there is that kind of moral imperative around AI, and I think we're all still not 100% confident that AI has that kind of ethical element really embedded, because how can it when private companies are building these tools? But again, perhaps a subject for a broader escape the echo chamber debate with a number of guests, Matthias. Something to reflect on. But I've really loved this conversation. I think the one thing that I've really taken away, the one clear thing for me, Shiran, is just the ability of tools to really help us recognize and respond to our bias in every stage of the kind of interview process, hiring, and probably more broadly, because we have a responsibility to check our biases, because that has an influence on our decision making. And ultimately, when you expand that out, that has an influence on who is hired, how they contribute to the culture of our particular business, our team, function, business, the values that are being imported into our business as well. So to simply think about bias or recognizing bias in isolation and not actually understanding the kind of ripple effects that it can have, certainly when you're responsible for hiring, I think is probably quite a narrow view. So I've loved that. Matthias?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was very funny, Shiran, that, and I mean this in a positive way, you said GMA, right? And I just had this morning a book in my hand called Evidence-Based Recruiting. And when I was going through this to just, get some inspiration also for our podcast today, they really mentioned this. GMA, a generic mental ability, I think it's called, is something that everybody should keep in mind in terms of this is something that, predicts future job performance. And the amount of different intelligence that we have seen is really important, especially the emotional one. There's also a cultural intelligence piece. And I think the biggest key takeaway for people who listen to this is social skills, core skills, power skills, however you want to call them, they are going to make or break your career and in order on how to be successful. So you need to figure out how to do this best. Don't get so hung up on functional skills and hard skills. Most of them out there will change quicker than you think. And so really, we will still see organizations having people employed. That's not going to change. So you better master these skills in the future.
100%.
Amazing. And Shiran, thank you so much for investing your time and joining us on Escape the Echo Chamber. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you, genuinely.
Thank you for having me. I love talking to you guys.
so many other topics that we could have explored. But again, thank you so much for joining us on Escape the Echo Chamber. You've been brilliant.
Thank you, guys. Love being here. Thanks so much.
Cool.